Hey guys, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to the Moonlight World, which is looking rather nice in the evening, if I do say so myself. Today we're going to be building a habitat for raccoons using this, the Raccoon scale of 4,000, which according to Planet Zoo is the smallest space that a raccoon can possibly fit through. To be honest with you, I'm not sure I trust it, but according to the heat map, they will be able to fit through this space. So we're going to use it to build a tiny overpass for the raccoons so they can walk over the guests between the two different parts of the habitat that you can see here. So let's get building, and thank you so much for all your comments on the last episode. I'm so glad you were as excited by the bat aviary that I built as I was. They are such cool animals. I had a lot of fun building that. And like I said last week, what I want is for each habitat in this zoo to have something unique about it, like we did with the wetland zoo. And so for this raccoon habitat, it's going to be a tiny little overpass for them. So I've only ever built one animal overpass before, which was the huge sky bridge for the giant otters at Tecton Zoo. So it's going to be really fun trying to build a more sort of realistic one that you might see in a zoo with mesh, using the new chain pieces from the Twilight Pack, which are already one of my favourite pieces in the game. And we'll build that and do some testing with the raccoons and see if they can get through it. More on that later. But let's start building the actual habitat. So according to the care manuals, the raccoons need a smooth wall that they can't climb, i.e. like the concrete that I'm using here. Which needs to be at least 1.2 meters tall, and it also needs an overhang to prevent them from being able to climb over it. So this wall should IRL keep raccoons in, and obviously in the game I think they need 3 meters in the game, but if you use construction pieces rather than the in-game barriers, then they will basically stop anything because they can't be climbed. So raccoons are going to be contained with this. That's not going to be an issue. I'm going to build them a really big habitat because, as you can see, it's split in half by this path. There's going to be a moat on both sides of the path to keep the raccoons from getting onto the path, and then the only way to get between the two different sides of the habitat will be the overpass that we're going to build, and that'll ensure that the raccoons use it loads. So I've copied it all the way around, and we're just going to delete the pieces that cross over the path to keep it nice and clean looking. And then we'll move on to the rest of the habitat. So I'm going to drop some rocks in here. One of the best tips I've had for Planet Zoo is if you ever make anything that you like that's kind of generic, rocks and things like that, always save it as a blueprint, and then the next time you need a pile of rocks, you don't have to build the whole thing again. So those, I think they're from the Land of the Leopard episode of Planet Wild, and they're going to form sort of the barrier of the moat. So the moat's going to go under the path, which is why I've deleted the path so that we can get the moat in here. We'll put it back in a minute, and then I'm going to lay concrete all down the sides of the path so the raccoons can't get between each side of the habitat without using the overpass. So we'll connect that up to the path leading into the flying forest, and then get back to this habitat. So more rocks on the other side, a bit of rotating and adjusting the height so they don't look exactly the same. And then I'm going to make a little pool for the raccoons to chill out in, maybe wash their food in, as they like to do in zoos. And we'll drag that into place and then fill that with water using the glass barriers so that we don't have to muck around with the terrain, and so you can get much better control of the height of the water. And we're going to completely hide this with rocks so it looks just like a little pool, a rock pool, I guess, in the habitat for them to use. And the way I'm going to make the habitat work is that on this side I'm going to fill it with all their enrichment items, and then on the other side they're going to have their food and shelter, and that way that's going to keep sort of constant traffic of raccoons going from one side of the habitat to the other. Whenever they want to play, they'll be on this side, and when they want to eat or sleep, they'll be on the other side, because we want to get that overpass in use as much as possible. So I spent ages on this little rock pool, but I really wanted it to look good. It's one of the features of the habitat. We need some, raccoons aren't the biggest animals, and this is a pretty sizable habitat. and it's going to be at night when the guests are here. So you want a way of getting the raccoons pretty close to the guests without them being able to escape. So I've made a few features that are up high like this to bring them closer to the path, to make sure that we can get a good view of them, especially once the sun goes down. We'll do a load of lighting as well. Obviously, that's really important in this zoo. Not something I've ever really bothered with before. I don't think there's barely any lights in Tecton Zoo, because I never ran the zoo at night. It's shut at like 5 p.m. or whenever I set it to in the menu. But with this one, it opens at I think it's like 6 p.m. if I recall correctly, and then is open throughout the night. So we're going to need loads of lights, so we will get those in a bit later. And I'm just using these rocks to make sure that the raccoons can actually get up here. And then we'll finish it off with a bit of moss, and later on we'll come back and put all the enrichment items in so they can use it. I raise the bottom as well so that it's not somewhere where they go swimming, it's somewhere where they can sort of sit in or just wash their food in. So just finish that off and then we will move on. So we'll take care of a bit of terrain painting now and start getting this habitat to look the way that we want it to. This is the first time I have ever built on a tropical map, which is like the most popular map in Planet Zoo. So it's been really fun exploring all the new terrain options here. We'll put the barriers in, all null barriers, no need for any real barriers because of the concrete pieces. And the way it's going to work, obviously you can only have one habitat gate. So I'm going to put the actual habitat gate here and get some mesh and things like that in it to keep the raccoons in. And then we're going to put an implied habitat gate on the other side, so it looks like the keepers can get to both sides of the habitat, but really they can only get to one side of it. But because it's only enrichment items on this side and they reset themselves automatically when the keepers come into the habitat, there's no need for the keepers in game to actually be able to get over to this side of it. And like I say, it's important that there is no other way for the raccoons to get from one side to the other, or they're not going to use this overpass, which predictably enough is bigger than it started out, because whilst the raccoons can walk through that tiny little space we saw at the beginning of the video, if it's on the floor, as soon as you put it into the air and they need to climb into it, suddenly the amount of space they need doubles. So I've had to make this bigger than it was originally, but it is still really small. I believe this is as small as it is possible to make, and I really like the way this looks once we get it all the way around the habitat. I'm going to curve it over the path so the guests get a great view as the raccoons run across it, and then we will join it up to some trees and a climbing frame and things like that on both sides of the habitat, so that the raccoons, like I say, use it a lot and go from one side to the other. I cannot even tell you how long it took to get this to work, going from building to the heat map and then back to building and then back to the heat map, and then finally, boom, the blue line showed up and the raccoons can get from one side to the other, and now we can get on with the rest of the habitat. So this is the implied entrance for the keepers that I mentioned, just so it all looks correct and it doesn't look like, why or how do the keepers get from one side to the other. And then we're going to move on and take care of some theming. So this is going to be called Raccoon Woods. So I want quite a lot of trees. I can't actually get that many into the habitat. We don't want them climbing them and escaping, but we're certainly going to use some of the new bristlecone pine branches to act as supports for the overpass. So we're going to use a few of these and then loads of the strangler fig roots and get that really sort of gnarly tree kind of look, old trees, slightly spooky, I guess you could say, in the centre there. And then use some more of my favourite chain pieces to join the climbing platforms onto the overpass. Again, I really like this little piece. I decided to use it again as a feeder for them as well, just an implied feeder. So this will show up on the outside of their shelter as well when the build is done. And while I finish that off, let's talk a bit about the plans for the Moonlight World itself. So I think I mentioned last week that I was going to group this zoo by geography rather than by biome like I normally do. So this habitat is going to be the beginning of the North American area. We're going to have a couple more animals in this area, and then the bats will be the first habitat in our African area. And then after that we're going to have a European area, and then finally an Asian area. So it's going to be quite a small zoo when it's finished. That's sort of one of the things I base this on is a zoo called Tropical World here in the UK, which is really small, probably takes maybe an hour to get around it, and it's just a really fun place to spend a nice hour. Some cool animals, no like, you know, elephants or lions or anything like that, but just really nicely themed, really well thought out. And that's sort of the effect that I want to get here, although on a bit of a bigger scale. Obviously this is Planet Zoo, so we can get a bit more expansive with it. Also, obviously we're concentrating on nocturnal animals here, so there's not going to be anything in the park that isn't either nocturnal or crepuscular. Moving on to the lighting now, and this is starting to look nice. This is what I want it to look like at night. We can have some red and yellow lights on the paths for the guests, and then some really subtle lighting in the habitat so that it's still dark for the animals. And we'll get on to the lighting solution that I've come up with a bit later in the video. But let's take care of their shelter now. So I built a really basic shelter for them, which was fun. I don't think I've ever built anything this kind of basic and realistic like you would see in loads of different zoos, rather than the really sort of over-the-top stuff that I like to build normally. So it was fun building something almost entirely out of mesh and wood. These are the new wood pieces from the Twilight Pack, which are, I think, the smallest wood pieces in the game, and they are really, really useful for stuff like this. And then some corrugated metal for the roof. There's a little feeder thing I spoke about. We're going to put some bedding for them in here, and then we'll move on and start doing all the planting, shrubs, bushes, trees, etc. to get the habitat itself looking as lush as we want it to. And then finally, the last thing that we're going to do is build a pretty sizable lighting rig that I want to use throughout the entire zoo to light all the habitats. So this was kind of tricky. What I want is a custom light that we can put around the outside of all the habitats that actually lights the habitats really subtly for the animals so that they look good and they're not all sort of washed out. Obviously the habitats still need to be dark because they're nocturnal, but then the light itself still needs to actually look like it's lighting the habitat. And the trouble you get is I'm using like 4 lights combined here in order to make the light inside the habitat subtle enough that the habitat is still dark, just with little splashes of sort of purple and red light here and there. You have to have the contrast on the lights way down, almost to nothing. You can see me lowering it here till I get the effect I want. But when you do that, the lights no longer actually shine when you look at them, which looks kind of weird. So then I've had to hide loads of small lights inside the big lights to get them to look the way that I want. Lastly, we'll just put some ropes in to sort of keep it stable, and that is Raccoon Woods done. So stick around for the cinematics. I really hope you enjoy how this turns out. I am really enjoying this Moonlight Zoo. Looking forward to making some more builds in here. I'll see you again very soon for some more Planet Zoo. Thanks for watching.